Okay, let's talk about one of the coolest and honestly weirdest ideas in all of art history. It's this story about how some of the greatest artists didn't just create images, they actually found them, hiding in the most random places you can imagine.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Of course you do. We've all done it. You're just staring up at the sky and bam, suddenly you see it. A dragon, maybe a boat, or a face just floating by. It's something we all do.
But what if I told you that for the absolute geniuses of the Renaissance, this wasn't just some lazy afternoon daydream? What if this was an actual technique, a powerful, deliberate tool they used to spark their creativity?
So, how did this simple little habit of seeing faces in clouds turn into a revolutionary artistic method? Well, let's dig in. So, our guide on this journey is a fantastic essay by the art historian H.W. Jansen. He's really the one who dug all this up and pieced together this incredible hidden history of how artists learned to use pure chance.
Now, believe it or not, there's a scientific name for this. It's called pareidolia. It's just this thing our brains are hardwired to do, find patterns where there are none. And what's wild is that centuries before scientists gave it a name, artists were already playing with it, using it to their advantage. But, the Renaissance masters didn't just pull this idea out of thin air. To really get where it came from, we've got to go way back, all the way to the ancient world. You see, this whole tension between art made by a person and art just found in nature is super old. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder wrote about a block of marble that when it was split open just happened to have a perfect picture of the god Silenus inside. No sculptor needed. And he tells this amazing story about a painter, Protogenes, who got so frustrated trying to paint foam on a dog's mouth that he threw his paint-soaked sponge at the canvas and accidentally created the most perfect, realistic foam he ever could have painted. So the idea was out there, kind of buried in these old stories, but it's too good an idea to just disappear, right? So who was the one who dug it up and brought it back for the Renaissance? Well, the first spark came from a brilliant guy named Leon Battista Alberti. He was one of the big thinkers of the early Renaissance. In one of his books on sculpture, Alberti noticed something really deep. He wrote that, sometimes you see these shapes in tree trunks or clods of dirt, and with just a little bit of imagination, they can be made to look like a real figure. And for Alberti, this was huge. He basically said, hey, maybe this is how art even started. He thought that the very first artists didn't just invent things from nothing. No, they'd find a rock that already kind of looked like a head or a twisted root that looked a bit like an arm, and then they would just perfect it. This was a radical idea back then. But here's the key thing. For Alberti, this was all a theory. It was about where art came from. He was observing the phenomenon, but he wasn't telling artists, hey, you should go do this. It wasn't an active creative tool yet. It was like he found a key, but nobody had figured out what door it was supposed to unlock. And that next giant leap forward, well, that would take a mind like Leonardo da Vinci. And this is where you see the huge difference. Alberti was the observer. He was looking backward, thinking about art's origins. But Leonardo, he was the activator. He looked forward and turned it into a method for creating new art. He didn't just say, that stain on the wall looks like a horse. He said, artists, go stare at that stained wall because you will find a horse there. Just listen to what Leonardo himself wrote. It's basically a recipe for genius. He says, go look at dirty walls or rocks with mixed colors. If you need to invent a scene, you'll start seeing things, landscapes, battles, all sorts of figures. And then he says, and you will find really marvelous ideas. He's giving artists permission to let their imagination run wild. I mean, this was a total game changer. It was a complete shift. Leonardo basically taught artists how to use the randomness of the world around them as a launch pad, a way to kickstart their own incredible powers of invention. And once Leonardo let this idea out of the bag, it started to spread like wildfire. It's so cool to see how it evolved. You start seeing it pop up everywhere. There was this artist, Piero di Cosimo, who was known for staring at clouds, and get this, even at spit on the ground, to come up with ideas for amazing cities and battle scenes. The great Botticelli supposedly joked that you could make a whole landscape just by chucking a sponge full of paint at a wall.
And in a painting by Mantegna, if you look really, really close at the clouds behind a saint, you can see a horseman just emerging right out of the mist. A true image made by chance, hidden right there in the painting. So here's the whole journey in a nutshell. It starts as this ancient curiosity, something Pliny wrote about. Then, around 1435, Alberti turns it into a theory about where art came from. Then Leonardo, around 1500, weaponizes it into a creative tool, and eventually it gets turned into a whole system.
Yeah, by the late 1700s, this British artist named Alexander Cozens took Leonardo's advice and made it into a teachable method he called the blot technique. He'd literally have his students just make random ink blots on paper and then use those accidental shapes as the starting point for really complex landscape drawings.
So think about that. What started as a miracle, a god's face appearing in a rock, had gone through this incredible transformation. It was now a repeatable, even teachable, tool for unlocking the creative parts of your brain.
Which leaves us with this really deep question, doesn't it? When an artist sees a battle scene in a water stain on the wall, are they discovering something that was already there, or are they creating something brand new? Maybe the real genius is living right there, on that blurry line between the two. What do you think?